Well, in the first century Roman world, you have extensive opportunities for travel, based around two things really: the roads, the Roman road system, which linked Rome especially with the major cities of the Roman Empire, and then the shipping routes, which primarily linked Egypt to Rome, but also linked via lots of other towns in Israel and Turkey, Greece, and on to Rome.
Of course, there was much travel on horses or in chariots or carts, but lots of people also traveled on foot. And it is quite likely that many of the early Christians who were traveling with messages or money from one place to another were doing so on foot. There were inns where people could stay, though again they seem not to have had a very high reputation. And this is one of the reasons why Christians are asked again and again to offer hospitality to travelers.
Probably the most widely travelled Christian in the first century, one of the most widely travelled of anyone in the Roman Empire, was the Apostle Paul. Born in Tarsus in Turkey, he then went to Jerusalem for his education and ended up as far west as Rome in the Roman Empire, perhaps even as far as Spain, covering hundreds of miles on his missionary journeys. When Paul travelled to Rome on his missionary journeys through Turkey and via Cyprus on the way to Rome, he would cover hundreds of miles, part of the way going by ship to Cyprus, then onto the Turkish mainland. He would cover a lot of miles on foot or perhaps on horseback, using a number of different modes of transportation to get from Jerusalem to where he wanted to get to.
So by land, you could travel 20 miles a day, things like that. And by ship, lots of opportunities for linking with trade routes. I mean, there's one reference to 600 passengers on a grain ship that's coming from Alexandria to Rome.
There was also quite a lot of traffic on the seas. This was traffic that carried pilgrims, traders, and of course cargo. And it is interesting that many of the vessels that are mentioned in the New Testament as carrying the apostles and their companions seem to be cargo vessels.
There are people travelling for festivals, for family, some for tourism, some for education, and also for work with the Roman army and other types of work that required travel. So it shows how much, in a sense, opportunity there was for people to travel. And very cheap, 2 drachmas for a family from Alexandria to Athens is one fare that we do know about. If you're catching a boat from Jerusalem, from Caesarea, the port, to Rome, in that route might take 40 days, something like that, with good winds. Actually, the reverse way is quicker. Prevailing winds are better from the west. So that's often 2 weeks, 3 weeks to come back from Rome. So the early Christians had plenty of opportunity to link up with those sort of routes, to take the good news about Jesus out from its base in Jerusalem to the rest of the Roman world fairly readily.
These early Christian communities weren't completely separate from one another. Paul and others were constantly travelling around, communicating from place to place, and telling one church in Thessalonica, for example, what was going on in another church in Turkey. So there was extensive communication between the various churches in the first century.
Certainly the early Christians took the good news of Jesus out very quickly. We've got very good evidence from the book of Acts, of the apostles, of what some of them did. In a sense, that follows a certain track through the northeast of the Mediterranean and follows the Apostle Paul in his travels and planting churches and telling people about Jesus and so on. But there are other tracks which we don't have such good evidence for within the New Testament, but which clearly did happen in the south, into Egypt, Alexandria and so on, and into the east.
So it was a well-connected world, even in our terms.
There's a great interchange of letters in the ancient world, official kind of imperial post, which went through a very regulated system where the courier would take it to where it had to go. Private individuals might have slaves who would carry their mail, but the general population might have to, in a sense, give their letter to somebody who they knew was travelling to a certain place, and then it would be delivered. We have really hundreds and hundreds of examples of these letters. In 37 AD, Emperor Tiberius died, and news reached Jerusalem within 5 weeks of his death. So that's a mark of how quick things could travel.
In the ancient world, communication, at least within the Roman Empire, was very good. People could write to one another. They could pay couriers to take what they had written to their friends. And the early church was very quick to use such methods of communication. We know that a letter written to one church would also be read in other churches, would be taken around, as it were, to be read in those churches.
When a prominent Roman wanted to send a letter to another prominent Roman, they would send a trusted envoy who would deliver the message for them. And the same thing happened with churches. When one church wanted to tell another church what was going on in their particular area, they would send an envoy to that church who would then go and someone would read out the letter aloud to that church. You couldn't just put it in a postbox as we do in Britain today, but you had to give it to someone whom you trusted, whom you knew was going to be committed to giving this communication to the recipient. They would almost certainly at the beginning have written in Greek. That was the common language of earliest Christianity, in particular in the West. And so someone would write with a stylus on a piece of papyrus, write the address on the back of the little roll of papyrus and send it off with a trusted envoy who could then deliver it to the church which was going to receive it.
And so it seems that the earliest materials that believers had were letters written to them by the apostles or other people to teach them the faith, to encourage them in the faith, to give generously to those who were less fortunate than themselves, to strengthen them in times of persecution.